Right, I'm very thrilled to be able to welcome Jolie Booth to our conference. Last year, Jolie led the Listening to the Land pilgrimage along the Michael Line and the Spine of Albion up to Glasgow to meet up with the COP26 conference. The route that they were taking passed through our area here in the northwest of England. And so a few of the gatekeepers in this area joined the pilgrimage for a couple of days from Cop in Staffordshire up to Alderley Edge in Cheshire. It was absolutely inspirational 2 days for us. A wonderful band of pilgrims. We had reasonable weather, which was helpful. The pilgrims themselves were coming off 3 weeks of fairly intense, hot walking through along the Ridgeway and up through the Midlands, and it finished in Cheshire on Alderley Edge, on the high point there called Castle Rock, where they performed the Dragon Dance. A group of pilgrims. This was the first draft of that performance, I think, Jolie, before you went on to present it or similar things up in Glasgow. But that Dragon Dance showed me certainly close creative theatre in the landscape, with its ability to heighten awareness of the surroundings and also of fellow pilgrims that you're walking with. So I found it a really magical 2 days. So Jolie's here. She's a theatre maker, a pilgrim, and a geomancer. And she's going to discuss the act of creating theatre as a spiritual practice. So I'll hand over to Jolie.
Thank you so much. And yeah, that was amazing to just hear Carrie's story. I first heard about Carrie when I did my first ever pilgrimage in 2020, and someone told me about her, and it was before I even really knew much about the pilgrimage world. So it's a real honour to have heard your story, and also fully, yeah, the trust thing is central, I think, to everything that we do as pilgrims, trusting the universe. So I just want to say, yeah, my name's Jolie, and it's a huge honour to be here today. So thank you so much. I am really excited about the title of this conference. If I was ever going to do a PhD, then I think How Does Art Rescue the Heart would make a really good title for it. So I've got so much that I could say on this subject and spent the last 20 years exploring this question. But obviously I'm going to have to give just a little snippet of this work, and because it's the Gatekeepers Trust Conference, I'm focusing on the pilgrimages that I've done in the last 2 years. These are part of a wider body of work, and there are so many, like Carrie was talking about, the synchronicities that run through everything. It's just crazy, and too many to go through. So I'm going to share some slides with you. So this year in September and October, I walked with 6 pilgrims along the Michael Ley line from Kenley Bowl to, from Uffington to Kenley Bowl in Cornwall. So we went west. And this was called the Strolling Mummers Pilgrimage for Unity. We started with an opening performance at Dragon Hill in Uffington, where last year, almost to the day, we held a ceremony with local wisdom keeper Chris Parks, as we walked from London to COP26 in Glasgow, travelling up the Spine of Albion ley line, which runs from Culver Down, which means Peace Hill, on the Isle of Wight, all the way up to Hope Bay at the top of Scotland. So walking from Peace to Hope. These 2 pilgrimages have seen us draw a St George's cross over the land, following these powerful lines, massaging the earth with our feet, intentions and ceremonies. Our last walk was called Listening to the Land Pilgrimage for Nature, and our intention was to hear what people had to say along the way that they'd like us to relay to people at the climate conference in Glasgow. 28 people joined me on this pilgrimage, walking 500 miles in total. And along the route, we developed a performance, which was born out of the ceremonies we were holding on each of the chakra points along the line, and that we then presented in the green zone at COP26. As we walked, we began to listen to the land, observing the ways in which it looked and how it was being treated, but also began to participate in a 2-way dialogue, as we realised it was asking us for what it could do to help, rather than the other way around. Humanity is making the land inhospitable, but for ourselves, Once we're gone, the land will have billions of years to heal itself. Beginning to hear the land speak to us was a profound experience, and in many ways quite harrowing. We all took a long time to integrate the experience. I myself suffered a breakdown in Glasgow when I discovered the politicians had already flown away in helicopters and little had been achieved. I later found out that it was generally agreed by EU leaders that they weren't willing to give Boris Johnson the satisfaction of achieving anything at COP26 post-Brexit. So hopefully more will happen at COP27 in Egypt this year. But our performance and even my breakdown felt like we contributed a big slice of hearts to COP26. We brought tears to the event and performed improvisations that shared our experiences of the 4 elements, like the dragon dance that just mentioned. Each performance was an improvisation, each one was different, but they all captured our experience of the 4 elements that we'd encountered in abundance on our journey. So through poetry, song, movement, music, and hidden ceremonial power, we successfully captured some of our experiences and some of the messages we'd heard from the people we'd encountered on our way, and the messages we'd downloaded from the land as we'd walked. More importantly than performing at COP, though, it felt like our footsteps and the ceremonies we performed at the chakra points up Albion's spine had a truly healing effect on the land, and that she was grateful. When we reached Hope Bay and held the final crown chakra performance, we passed through a double rainbow to get there, the ends hovering over the highlands, which were golden with autumnal bracken. At the coast, the land curved around the bay like a dragon, and when we finished the closing ceremony, we heard 7 claps of thunder, even though there was no rain and not a cloud in the sky. Although it took a lot out of all of us and a long time to recover, the pilgrims and I experienced miracles in our lives. When we returned in the form of dream jobs, better houses, loving partners, and life goals coming true, it was as if we were all thanked in some way for the work that we'd done. As we walked this year, we were performing a mummer's play called St. George and His Many Enemies. Written using several historical sources, the play was an amalgamation of a few remaining recorded texts that were penned down in Victorian times, but display regional differences, alluding to an older oral tradition. One of the things that came to our attention on our last walk to COP26 was the idea of re-indigenization. So the theatre practice that I'm trained in is called fooling. And this is a form of sacred theatre that feels like the most direct line from the earliest form of showmanship, which was born from the performances of the shamans or medicine folks of old. In Rogan Taylor's seminal work, The Death and Resurrection Show, he talks of how ever since humans gained consciousness and were able to comprehend the concept of past and future, humanity has feared death and sought ways to avoid it. In the past, if someone managed to survive a fever from an illness or infection, people wanted to know how this had been achieved. As spoken language was limited, and not even the language the inner world speaks, which is the realm of dreams and metaphors, the death survivors tried to express their experiences through movement, dance, storytelling, music, and art. And this is where all art originates from. I personally believe that theatre is a form of martial art for the inner world, and has been practiced in safe spaces forever since we became conscious, in places like caves, where the walls were lined with paintings and acoustics were good, so that people could learn how to deal with adrenaline. In quantum physics, the observer effect shows how photons behave differently when observed. And I think anyone who's ever been asked to speak or perform in public, like now, will agree that every cell in your body starts to shake when you know you're being observed. Learning to relax and be okay with this teaches you to be able to slow down in an actual fight or flight situation. You become like a ninja or someone in the Matrix. If you can stay calm whilst adrenaline is coursing through your body, then you reach a state where you feel yourself manipulating reality, which is what theatre is. After a short time, art became in itself a healing tool, and this power is and magic is still inherent in show business today, even though it's a cheaper, commodified version of it. Fooling, however, is the most direct lineage from the shamans to the modern day, and yet it's the least well-known art form, which I think is really interesting as it slips through the cracks. Fooling, like the tarot card, is about stepping off the cliff into the unknown and trusting that when you fall, you fly. One of the most profound practices that we do in fooling is called circle plays, where we hold a ceremonial space, like in a cave, and each person takes it in turn to go in the middle and be witnessed as we explore our inner worlds. As we relive experiences, we play all of the parts, including even the inanimate objects that were present. seeing the story from a multitude of new perspectives, which helps to heal the traumas as well as move us on from memories that may have held us back, possibly for decades. Many of the pilgrims on both last year and this year's walks were people I knew from the Fooling community, and we spent a lot of time, especially last year, teaching and practicing Fooling along our journey. So this has become an integral part of what we're doing. And even in the ceremonies that we held along the chakra points, which were often led by wisdom keepers, we brought some Fooling element to that, because, you know, even within that practice of holding ceremony, like things have become a bit rigid, like there are certain voices that everyone does and like a way of being, and we began to kind of play around with that and yeah, be a bit irreverent with it. Joanna Macy writes in her landmark inquiry, Active Hope, which explores how we find hope in these difficult times, that there are 3 threads to the Great Turning, as she coined it. The first is activism, which we all know about, so that scientists and journalists putting pressure on the business as usual narrative to slow everything down and try to attempt to reverse the effects of what's happening. Secondly, there's systemic change, which is happening incrementally through businesses having sustainability policies, increasing in organic farming practices, recycling, etc. Then there's the need for consciousness shifting. So the stories we tell ourselves and that weave our reality together. And this is where the work that I create comes in, and specifically the idea of re-indigenization. So part of the process that disconnected us from the land in the first place was the loss of our folk traditions and customs. These traditions were deeply connected to the land cycles, and as we became dispossessed of our common land, less controlled by the seasons and harvests, more urbanized, our traditions became irrelevant and fell by the wayside. By reclaiming, remembering, and reinventing our folk culture, we are rebuilding positive relationships with the natural world and our right to live and thrive in harmony with the land that we are part of. Mummers plays were traditionally performed on May Day and Christmas. Often they contain a skit where the land gets resurrected, suggesting a connection to a deeper mystery that the plays used to be rites performed to and for the land as fertility rituals. It's interesting that during our pilgrimage this year, we saw 3 prime ministers and 2 monarchs in power. And whether that was because we were performing this powerful sacred play on the sites along the ley line is not for us to say, nor is it relevant, as the intention was to create mystery and wonder. Myths start somewhere, and as the cord to our Indigenous culture has been cut, we must start again. In The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr, he looks at how stories can change our very behaviour. In Fooling, we have a saying which is create or be created. With the work we are doing, we are weaving a new narrative into the fabric of our culture. Rather than the guilty rod narrative of beating ourselves up about recycling, eating meat or driving, then this approaches the carrot narrative of being deeply and hopelessly in love with the earth, which changes our behaviour through love rather than guilt. Performance, festival, celebration, ritual all help us to connect deeper to the land in this loving and reverential way, and in a 2-way dialogue. In the version of the play that the Strolling Mummers were performing, we see that St. George fights with a dragon. St. Michael, the archangel whose ley line we were walking, is also a dragon slayer. So on our pilgrimage, many of the churches we passed had stained glass windows to both St. Michael and St. George. George is normally seen slaying the dragon, but Michael is often depicted pointing at the dragon with a long spear, as if he's asking us to pay attention to something. This could be interpreted as him pointing to the savage, animal, instinctive part of ourselves, the inner part of us that is infinite, is one with the land and everyone and everything else in the whole universe beyond. So this is the part of us that is the Fool. It's the part that makes love, gives birth, makes music, performs theatre. It's without judgment, without thinking, without criticism. In ancient Chinese culture, ley lines were called dragon lines, and only emperors were allowed to build structures upon them so no one else could utilise their power. In Aborigine culture, ley lines were called song lines, which were songs created by the ancestors that sung the land into being, telling stories of how over there Witchy Grub pushed his way up beneath the land, creating a mountain range, and then over there Coyote took a piss, creating a watering hole. The first time the baby kicks in the mother's womb, she remembers where she's standing and goes and tells the elders. They'll know where from which song line jumped up through her legs and kick-started the baby into life from where she was standing. So the baby is not born of the family or the tribe, but of a song line. And when it's older, it will go and walk about and use the song as a map to find its way through the outback, knowing where the next watering hole, food and shelter will be based on the song. One of the main stories in Australia is about the rainbow serpent. They believe when they see a rainbow, it's the serpent travelling through the sky from one watering hole to another. Apparently, the Michael ley line travels all around the world, connecting to the rainbow serpent line in Australia. In this silly mummers play, St. George, who represents the land of Albion, doesn't deal with his shadow part, his inner dragon. So he begins to imagine evil out in the world in the form of Beelzebub. Once he's banished Beelzebub, then he sees evil in the form of the feminine, which is Mary Tinker. Then once he's banished her, he sees evil in the form of the other, which is the Muslim Saracen knight, who kills St. George, bringing about his downfall. Then a hippie lefty herbalist comes along and brings St. George, or the land, back to life again using a healing herb, elecampane, and a magical incantation, thus restoring harmony until the cycle begins again. This is the folk tale of our land, and it's been told and performed for hundreds of years. So what came first, the spell of the folk tale or the story of our land? It's hard not to feel a bit like history keeps repeating itself. And we wanted to know how we could break this cycle and how we can learn to see our enemies as ourselves and how we can stop creating enemies. So these were the questions that we asked the people we met as we walked. And what we found was that we were blown away by how generous and kind people were to us. Folks from different demographics and echo chambers, people who seemed like the enemy across social media algorithms and mainstream media, but who in the actual flesh were kind, emotional, everyday beings who helped us immeasurably, saw how vulnerable we were being and shared their own vulnerability, who were just doing their best to get by. We also discovered how people are mobilising. Community gardens, shops, libraries, organic farming, protest movements, economic transport, fashion alternatives are springing up all over the place. So most people are not acting like it's business as usual. And most people aren't waiting for Westminster to sort things out for them. They're doing it themselves. The great turning, as Joanna Macy describes it, is well and truly underway, which means there is hope, active hope, and it just needs enough of us to fan the flames and push the scales in the other direction for the course to change. I truly believe that this epoch in our story is the next chapter in our evolution, a story that will tell us how through climate change and climate crisis, we reunited the inner and outer worlds, once more making everything we do an act of worship and all life sacred, where we untwisted the twisted twin, our fool or the dragon, our inner demon, reuniting it with the shining night version of ourselves that we present to the world, so that we all stand fully in our power with open hearts and minds. There is only one eternity and we're all part of it, both outer and inner worlds. So, I don't know why I'm not on the full screen, but hopefully you can see me. So the symbol of infinity is a sideways figure of 8, which is called a lemonscape. Now these two circles represent the inner and the outer. When we're fooling, performing, creating, making love, or watching a sunset, when we're in the moment, that sphincter in the middle, that's our ego. And this untwists and then inner and outer become one. So the lemonscape becomes a circle, which is why the Fool is the 0 card at the top of the tarot deck. In this space, anything is possible, and we're all one, liberated from our egos. We have achieved so much in the outer world, but it has reached its limits and is now destroying itself. So it's time to invite back in the inner world, to give our lives meaning and reconnect to the infinite that we're all part of. To remember we're one with the whole of humanity, all living things, the planet and the cosmos. It's time to come home to ourselves and get to the heart of the matter. And there is no heart without art. That's me. Thank you. Now, I don't know if anyone's got any questions. I'd love to answer some questions if anyone has got any.
Jolie, thank you so much. That was really, really powerful. Thank you. Loved some of the images that came through, like the land was grateful after you arrived in Glasgow and went on. You know, that's just so powerful. The truth, if you like, that walk in the landscape with light in our footsteps works both ways.
Yeah.
It works for the land and it works for us.
Peter said at the beginning, the rainbows appear at just the perfect time to tell you you're doing it right. And that was exactly what happened. This double rainbow appeared and it was like, spot on. Yeah.
And 7 claps of thunder as well.
Yeah.
Nature's applause, basically.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate that. Have we got any questions, Stephen? I haven't looked.
No. Oh, yes. Hold on. Julie's said, thank you for this, Jolie. This is giving me so much to think about.
Oh.
No, I would just like to ask, is anything happening?
Christine's got her hand up.
He's got a hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, Jolie, I really enjoyed your talk and your presentation. I'm just kind of curious. Is there any element of sort of audience feedback? Do you play with the audience? And if so, how do you do it?
Yeah, the audience are very much key. I mean, if you think about the fool is only there if there's the king. So the audience is the king and the fool is but also the main thing with fooling is that you have to make yourself vulnerable so that the audience is willing to be vulnerable with you. And we are then subverting reality by, saying, oh, here we all are standing on the ceiling or something like that, just something that just suddenly flips reality, that the audience will go with you because they trust you, because they can see that you're being open and vulnerable with them. And through doing that, it brings into question all of our agreed version of reality. So, in a fooling show, the audience could be taken out for dinner. You could leave the theatre and go out for dinner and go to a restaurant together or something, and the whole audience is the opposite. So they're key. And when we created our performances, they were born out of us doing the ceremonies. And part of it was feeling that actually the people on the pilgrimage, who were sort of audience themselves to begin with, some of them were very far removed from the kind of world that did ceremonies. So a lot of it was quite inclusive at the beginning. And so part of the work was us making it feel more inclusive, which when we did the final performances, and especially as we got further up north in Kendal and places, we'd taken away it calling in the directions, but instead we just talked about the elements. And then that didn't mean anyone felt like they were suddenly in some kind of strange thing that they hadn't signed up for. So it was just about how to use the power of what was there, but then to put it in a place and in a way that was accessible to everybody.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Does that answer your question? Or
Yes,
yes,
it does. I have a friend who's worked for years in a kind of improvisational theater where they elicit stories from the audience, and it's a kind of a feedback process. That's why I was asking that.
This is very much the audience. If there wasn't an audience, you'd kind of just be goofing around on your own. Yeah, so they're key.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks once again, Jolie. It's been great.
Pleasure.